tracking calories and macros and strict meal plans are dead. If that sounds too good to be true, here's what I think you should do instead. Because these concepts have been around for ages at this point. It used to be the case that everyone used to try to stick to these strict meal plans to get results. And quickly over time, people realized that there was a massive flaw to that. It relied on your life being absolutely perfect. It required you to be able to eat out of Tupperwares for every occasion, never have a date night, never have a work dinner. It required you to have this specific thing in this specific amount at this specific time. Because of that, no one could actually be consistent enough to get results. Everything sounds good on paper, but what is the real life application of it like? Because if it were as simple as tracking calories and macros, if it was as simple as a meal plan, then everyone would be in shape by now. Because some poor people are still paying coaches just to get a macro plan, but you can get this information anywhere. You can look up online how to figure out your macro targets, how to figure out how many calories you should eat. We don't have an information problem. All these approaches are out there. They just don't work for one reason or another. In the case of meal plans, it's that people got bored. They don't want to be eating the same exact thing at the same exact time, day after day after day. So it stopped them from being consistent. This is where people would then go off plan, and because they couldn't be perfect, it didn't account for their lifestyle, most people just couldn't stick to it well enough to actually get the results. So if you've got work dinners, if you've got date nights, if you want to be thriving in other areas, then this just wouldn't work for you. What came as a counter to that was then the idea of flexible dieting, if it fits your macros. And it was touted as this flexible solution because as long as you hit within these numbers on your daily basis, then you'd progress in the right direction. And again, theoretically, it sounded amazing. But in practice, all that happened was it left people with no real information. It left them with a number to aim for on a daily basis, but no idea how to actually do that in the most effective way possible. So maybe you've tried tracking calories and macros yourself, but you're just a bit overwhelmed of like, what do you mean 200 grams of chicken breast isn't 200 grams of protein? Or you're trying to figure out, last minute of the day, like, oh, how can I finish up this final 30 grams of protein when, I still have protein to get in, but I've used up all my calories and fats. It's just a massive faff. It's time consuming. And once again, that meant that people quickly chucked that out the window and couldn't be consistent with it. For the few who actually managed to figure it all out, then there was the other problem of it just wasn't that effective. If you've tried it before, you might have quickly found yourself in the position where you have super low energy or you're always craving things. So you end up going over your macros even when you've got those targets in place. Because what happens here is that there's no real structure to that nutrition. It really annoys me when a coach says to their client, okay, well, you're traveling. Well, we know you won't be able to stick to a meal plan. Here's your numbers, just hit those, off you go. Because if you start your day with just some cereal or a bunch of carbs, you want to start the day with just the things that you like, you save the protein until last thing at night, your blood glucose spikes up and then it crashes back down really quickly. You're left feeling lethargic and looking for something to replenish those blood sugars. That's why you're always craving more carbs. So the basic premise of macros is just too basic. It doesn't work. Your protein isn't spaced out evenly. You're not recovering well from your sessions. You can't progressively overload. So because your session performance is now going to pot, instead of having that lean beach body that you wanted, you now look like a UNICEF kid when you've been dieting, when putting in all that effort. So here's what happened to me instead, because I'd tried this before, it didn't really work. This was now, in my early days of coaching. It's when I was actually working in finance as well. So because I was living alone, I was living in a studio and I was working full-time in finance. I grew up Portuguese. My parents are Portuguese. So I was raised by a mum who can cook. So I was used to having all these lovely meals on a pretty much daily basis, all these, various dishes from around the world. She loves her food. So I definitely couldn't stick to a meal plan, eating this exact same thing day after day after day. Certainly not all my meals being all the same. So I quickly started to realize that from the food sources that compose most of my favorite meals, right? I'm 2 days out from my next shoot. I've been prepping. I've been eating like a king this whole time while I've been dieting. This approach I found works really, really well we're basically using science-backed methods to allow you to dominate fitness without it dominating your lifestyle. If you also want to be focusing on your career, nurturing your relationship, you're a guy who just wants it all, then this will hopefully help you really take some steps in the right direction. Because these are the types of things I've been eating on a daily basis while I've been dieting. Curries, had loads of those. Stir fries, loads of those. Steak and chips or steak and fries. And then even on the odd occasion, factoring in a meal out like a pizza or a burger. Because this approach doesn't require you to be perfect. It actually accounts this into that. And I'm going to teach you one of the strategies that we use to do exactly that. But it doesn't require you to be perfect, because if you're aiming for it all, if you've got a demanding career, you're not gonna be perfect. That acceptance is key. So you need a system that actually accounts for that. And when you couple this with a structured process, a timeline like we do for our clients, understanding rate of loss and how aggressively we're dieting, you'll quickly see how this actually accounts for not being perfect. Plenty of my clients have to travel to different countries for work. Plenty of my clients have work dinners that they need to go to, traveling to the other side of the UK. So we need to be able to account for meals out and not being absolutely perfect. Here's what happened. So I started to put together recipes that my mum had sent me, and I started to realize that, well, you know what? Chicken and beef, there's a minimal difference in calories for these. I don't think I'm gonna struggle to get lean because of the 5 extra calories that the beef mince has. So I took some of my favorite meals, say chili was a decent one, or you know what, for the sauces I'm going to use, let's actually diversify it a little bit more for the sake of example. So let's use a couple of chicken and rice dishes. I loved paella and I loved stir fry. So both with chicken and rice, literally all that changes is the seasonings, the sauces that we'd use with those meals, the vegetables. And of course, if I use the same amount of rice, same amount of chicken for either of those, I just dress it up differently. I've got 2 options there that are the exact same calories. So then I started to get adventurous and I realized that, well, you know, beef is pretty much the same as chicken when it comes to macronutrient composition. They're both lean proteins. They've both got a full spectrum of amino acids. And, well, pasta per gram, per 100 grams, you're gonna have the exact same calories and pretty much the same macros, negligible difference, as rice. So I could have a chicken and rice stir fry, or by using the same portions, I could have a bolognese with beef mince and pasta. It'll come out to the same thing. Now there's a little more to integrate into that. There's the idea of dietary fats, which we like to include with most of our meals, help regulate our blood glucose. But to get the point across, these 2 options were effectively the same. So I could be like, well, I can have this or I can have that. And then over time, I started to realize things like, well, potato has, you need 4 times the amount of potato to have the calories of, you know, a gram of rice or pasta. So over time, I started to branch out and I realized that, oh man, without needing to track a single calorie, I can have this or that, and it all adds up to exactly the same thing as long as I understand this portioning system and these swaps. So that became the basis of my hybrid nutrition system. And this is how I now get to integrate those details into my clients' plans. I get to make sure that they're eating protein with each of their feedings, making little swaps, just little changes from where they're at the moment, making sure that that behavior change is super low barrier. And I get to include plans on meals on their plans based on the meals and foods that they actually want to be eating. And they've got options for all of those. So they're not following this super strict meal plan that you can only eat this. They've got options for all of those meals on there. And it all comes out to the exact same thing. So as long as they take into account the portions on there, and then over time, we start to build them up with that swap strategy, this then becomes this autopilot nature of you could have endless possibilities without needing to track a single calorie. Now, for my guys that do like to have a sweet treat, fun fact, for most of the week through this diet, I was having an ice cream every single night until very temporarily I've had to dig that a little bit harder to finish things off. I was having ice cream every single night though. How I did this was by building the meals to cover most of my calories and then leaving a few hundred calories spare that I could be like, well, now I just need to look at the label of this ice cream, look at the label of this chocolate, and just quickly figure out how many calories are in here, and I can just have a little bit of that. So that way, I was always including the sweet treats that I wanted as well, or I could, actually, if there was something that I wouldn't mind having on repeat that was a sweet treat, I'd actually just factor that into the plan. So I started to get the best of both worlds. Now, when we combine this to keep people consistent, they drop fat at a pretty fast rate, which then means that on the weekend, if they want to go for a date night, coupled with some decision-making processes that will teach them to manage events and meals out, they end up being able to do it all while staying ruthlessly on track with what they're meant to be doing diet-wise. And that's how they're getting such incredible results. If you're curious to see some, I've dropped a link in the description. Please just go check that out, and you can see some of the things that we've been achieving on the team. But this made the process flawless because they didn't have to waste time figuring it all out on MyFitnessPal. They didn't have to stick to a strict plan. With the right systems, they could have the best of both worlds, and it's as easy and autonomous as it gets. If that sounds like your kind of thing, if you want to see exactly how we can guide you through that process and you want to know a little bit more about how we can work together using these strategies, this doesn't even start to cover my Pinnacle training system, which is how my guys are getting incredible results, progressing and building a bit of lean muscle whilst leaning down through the hybrid nutrition system using science-backed methods, and we make everything super simple. Then just drop me a message on Instagram, just DM me the word lean, and I'll share a little bit more info about exactly how we can help.